The bathroom door closed at 4:53 a.m. I remember because I was already awake. One of those nights where sleep had stopped working sometime around 2 in the morning, and I'd given up trying. I was lying there in the dark, counting ceiling cracks like they were sheep, when I heard Sarah move, not the casual shuffle of someone heading to the bathroom in the middle of the night. This was deliberate, quiet, practiced, almost. I should have paid attention to that. I didn't. She was in there for 17 minutes, long enough that I started to wonder if she was sick, long enough that I nearly got up. But then I heard the sink, the toilet, the familiar mechanics of a normal person doing normal things, and I rolled back toward sleep. The thing about living with someone for 11 years is that you stop really listening. You stop wondering. Their movements become white noise, and you mistake that numbness for comfort. When Sarah came back to bed, she was moving differently, more careful, slower. Even half asleep, I noticed something was off, but I didn't ask. That's the part that stays with me, that I didn't ask. "You okay?" I should have asked, but I didn't. Instead, I felt the mattress shift as she settled back down beside me, and within a few minutes, I was asleep. Real sleep this time, the heavy kind that feels like drowning. I woke up at 7 to my phone buzzing. A news alert. Something vague about a respiratory incident in Portland. A hospital had been evacuated. Precautionary measures. I scrolled past it while I waited for the coffee to brew, barely registering the words. There was always some kind of respiratory incident somewhere. Every winter, every season, really. I didn't think about it again until much later, when thinking about it became the only thing that mattered. Sarah was already dressed when I came into the bedroom. Not just dressed, she was wearing clothes she rarely wore. Practical clothes. Dark jeans. A long-sleeved shirt I didn't recognize. Her hair was in a tight bun, pulled back from her face in a way that made her look like someone I needed to take seriously. "You're up early," I said. It was a statement that asked a question. She was at the closet, moving hangers with mechanical precision, not looking for something, selecting something. "Meeting with my mom," she said. "I told you about this." She hadn't. Or maybe she had, and I hadn't been listening. Those are the same thing, I guess. "Today?" I said. "Today," she confirmed. "Probably overnight. She's been dealing with some stuff. I want to help her get the house organized." I nodded. Her mother lived about 90 minutes away, inland, in one of those towns that exists mainly as an exit on the highway. They were close, Sarah and her mother. Close enough that Sarah would drive out regularly. Close enough that this shouldn't have seemed strange. But something in the way she was moving, efficient, controlled, avoiding my eyes, made my stomach feel thin. "How long?" I asked. "Couple days," she said. "Maybe 3. She opened a drawer and pulled out some clothes, started rolling them tightly instead of folding them. Again, that careful precision, the precision of someone following a checklist. "I'll get my stuff together," she said, still not quite meeting my eyes. "I'll be ready to leave after breakfast." She moved past me, and I caught the scent of her shampoo, something I'd smelled 10,000 mornings, and it suddenly felt like a memory of something that was already over. I reached out without thinking and took her wrist. She stopped, turned, and in that moment, something happened to her face. Something passed across it like a shadow. Fear, maybe, or grief, or both. "What's wrong?" I asked her. "Nothing," she said. And then, quieter, "Everything's fine." She pulled her wrist gently from my hand, and I let her. Breakfast was eggs and toast. We made it together, and she was normal during it. Or she was performing normal so well that I couldn't tell the difference. She talked about her mother's garden, which wasn't thriving. She talked about her work, which was fine. She asked me about the Henderson project, which was tedious and ongoing. We were an ordinary couple eating breakfast on an ordinary morning, and I kept waiting for her to say something real, and she didn't. By the time we finished, I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined the tension. This is what long marriages do. They train you in denial. Sarah showered while I cleaned up. I heard the water running for a long time. When she came out, her hair was wet, and she was moving even more quickly now, with an edge of urgency that was starting to seem less like morning routine and more like escape velocity. She disappeared into the bedroom. I heard the closet again, the sound of the suitcase being dragged out from the shelf, the zip-open hiss of it. I told myself not to go in there. I told myself that whatever this was, I didn't need to make it worse by hovering. But I stood in the doorway anyway, watching her pack. She'd laid out a small black rolling suitcase, and she was filling it with clothes in an almost aggressive way. Not angry, she wasn't angry, but decisive, final. The kind of packing you do when you know what you need and you're not going to waste time second-guessing yourself. "Is there something you want to tell me?" I said. She kept packing. A pair of jeans, a sweater, socks, underwear, like I wasn't even there. "Sarah." She zipped a compartment closed and finally looked at me. Her eyes were doing something strange, something that looked like they were asking me for permission to say something she'd been planning to say all along. "My mom's house needs work," she said. More than I said. "Okay," I said slowly. "Structural issues," she continued. "It's been worse than she let on. She might need me to help more than just a few days." I watched her face. She was lying. Or she was lying in the service of something true. She was covering for something. And I had this sudden, urgent feeling that I needed to understand what it was before she left. That once she walked out the door, the window for knowing would close. "How much more?" I asked. "I don't know yet," she said. "Until I get there and we really look at it, I don't know." She turned back to the suitcase and started adding toiletries from the bathroom counter. The careful, methodical way she was moving made me think of someone preparing for something they couldn't predict the duration of. Not a few days. Not really. "Are you leaving me?" The question came out before I could stop it. She actually flinched. Her hand stopped over the suitcase. And for a second, the lie completely fell away from her face. And what was underneath was so raw and so frightened that I barely recognized her. "No," she said. "God, no. Why would you?" She stopped, closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she was controlling her face more carefully. "I'm not leaving you. I'm just going to help my mom." But her voice had changed. It had become smaller, younger, like she was talking to me from somewhere far away, and distance was making everything thin. I didn't push it. I've thought about that 1,000 times since, about how I could have pushed it, how I could have said something that would have made her tell me the truth, how if I'd just said the right thing, everything might have gone differently. But I didn't know that then. I didn't know any of it. "Okay," I said instead. "Okay, well, be careful driving." She nodded and pulled the suitcase closed. It was smaller than I would have thought. Compact, efficient. She carried it downstairs, set it by the front door. By 10:30, she'd loaded it into the car, and we were saying goodbye in the driveway under a gray morning sky that felt like rain was somewhere in its plans but hadn't committed yet. She hugged me tight, longer than usual, and I remember thinking that she was memorizing the feel of me, the way you do when you're about to forget what something felt like. "I love you," she said into my shoulder. "I need you to know that, specifically. I love you." "I love you too," I said back, and I did. But I also didn't understand why she was saying it like a goodbye. She pulled away, got in the car, and I stood in the driveway watching her drive away, and I had this creeping sense that I'd just failed some kind of test, and I'd never get another chance to take it. The news hit hard that afternoon. I was at work, the Henderson Project, which was indeed tedious and ongoing, when someone sent a link in Slack. A hospital in Portland overflowed, not just evacuated. The phrase people were using was unprecedented surge. Bodies in the hallways, staff overrun. And then the story started to fragmentize into 1,000 different versions, and nobody seemed to know what was actually happening. I tried calling Sarah around 3 o'clock. She didn't answer. I tried texting. The usual progression of escalating concern masquerading as casualness. "Hey, saw something on the news from Portland. You good?" Like I was just making conversation. She texted back an hour later. "Mom's fine. We're good." That was it. Just those words. Not her usual texting voice, which would have been more specific, more present. This was someone typing a response to close a conversation. I should have called again. I should have driven out there. I should have done something other than sit at my desk and refresh news websites while I told myself I was probably overreacting. That Sarah probably just needed a break. That people had reasons for being strange that weren't world-ending. By 6 o'clock, the news had stopped being vague. Confirmed cases. 7 in Portland. 12, 18. Something with a respiratory presentation. Something that spread quickly. Something that the authorities were initially calling a novel infection, and then gradually upgrading to something more serious, though they weren't quite using the word outbreak yet. They were being careful with their language. I appreciated that at the time. I thought it meant they had things under control. I was an idiot. I drove out to Sarah's mother's house around 8. It took 93 minutes. I spent most of that drive thinking about the things I should have asked Sarah that morning, the things I'd missed, the way she'd looked at me like she was saying goodbye. The roads were mostly empty, which was strange. Not deserted, just emptier than a Friday night usually felt. People staying home. People listening to the news. People understanding something in their bones before their conscious minds had caught up. Sarah's mother lives in this old colonial on the edge of a small town, surrounded by about an acre of land that her husband had planned to do something with before he died. It's been mostly neglected since then. Overgrown gardens. A tool shed that's slowly collapsing. The kind of property that requires maintenance and intention. And Margaret, Sarah's mother, had provided only the former. The front lights were off when I pulled up. The house was dark except for the soft glow from a back room. I sat in the car for a minute, collecting myself, trying to figure out what I was actually going to say when I walked in. I didn't have to figure it out. Sarah came out of the house before I'd even gotten out of the car. She was wearing different clothes from what she'd left in. She'd changed into dark pants and a dark sweater. Her hair was down now, and she looked tired in a way that suggested she hadn't slept much since this morning. 7 hours ago. "What are you doing here?" she asked through the car window before I could even open the door. "I was worried," I said, getting out anyway. She moved toward me, and I thought she was going to hug me, but instead she took my arm and started pulling me back toward the car. "We need to talk," she said, "but not inside, not where my mom can hear." "Sarah, what's going on?" "Please," she said. And there was something in the way she said it that made me stop asking questions and just follow. We drove. She directed me to a state park about 20 minutes away, a place we'd hiked a few times years ago. The parking lot was completely empty. The sky had finally committed to rain and was delivering it steadily, and the trees looked like they were absorbing sound. We sat in the car. The engine was off. The rain was loud on the roof. "I lied to you this morning," Sarah said, "about why I was leaving." "Okay," I said. I already knew this, but hearing her say it felt important. "My mom called me at 4:45 this morning," she continued. "She was crying, really upset. She said something was happening, something was going to happen, and she wanted me to come help her prepare." "Prepare for what?" She didn't explain it well. She was scared. But she said that someone she knows, a friend who works at the hospital in Portland, called her last night. Said that the hospital had admitted people with a very specific kind of respiratory infection. Very aggressive. Very communicable. And she said the hospital was telling them to prepare for a surge, that the health department knew about it, but wasn't making it public yet. "That sounds like a rumor," I said. "That's what I thought," Sarah said. But my mom insisted. She said her friend was specific about it, about how fast it spreads, about how many people had already been exposed. And she asked if I could come and help her stockpile supplies, that she didn't think there was much time. The rain intensified. The car felt like it was underwater. "Why didn't you just tell me this?" I asked. Sarah turned to face me. In the dim light from the dashboard, I could see that her eyes were red from crying. "Because you would have told me I was being paranoid. Because you would have made jokes. Because I didn't know if she was right. And if I was wrong, I didn't want you to spend the next week telling me that I'd panicked over nothing. And if she was right..." Sarah's voice cracked. "If she was right, then I wanted you to be able to say later that you hadn't believed it either. That you were just going about your day. Because then you'd be safe in a way that I wouldn't be." "Safe from what exactly?" She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I thought she wasn't going to answer. "My mom thinks this is going to be bad," she finally said. "Bad enough that things are going to change in ways that we can't predict. And she wanted to prepare, and I..." Sarah looked away toward the rain-dark park. I started to believe her, so I packed a bag, a real bag, not the kind you take for a few days. "Where were you planning to go?" "I didn't know," Sarah said. "That's the thing. My mom said we needed to get away from the cities, away from anywhere with hospitals, away from population centers. She said if this thing is as communicable as her friend thinks it is, anywhere with a lot of people is going to become dangerous. So I packed things I thought I might need if I had to leave quickly. And I didn't tell you because..." She stopped and looked at me, and her face was pleading. "Because I was hoping I was wrong. Because I was hoping my mom was just scared, and I'd get here, and she'd be embarrassed that she'd called me in a panic, and we'd laugh about it, and everything would be normal." "What happened when you got there?" I asked. "She showed me the news," Sarah said. "Not the official news. Her friend had sent her videos. People getting sick in Portland. People in hazmat suits at the hospital. People being turned away. She showed me the videos, and then she showed me what she'd already bought. She's been preparing for something like this for years. She had a stockpile. She had supplies. And she wanted to know if I'd help her decide what to bring if we had to leave." "Had to leave," I repeated numbly. "She thinks the government is going to lose control of this very quickly," Sarah said. "She thinks they're already lying about the severity. And she thinks that by the time they admit what's really happening, it's going to be too late for people who aren't prepared." That's conspiracy thinking, I said. That's fear-based. I know, Sarah cut me off. I know how it sounds. I don't care anymore. I care that she might be right. We sat in silence. The rain continued. Somewhere in the rain-dark park, there were probably animals moving. Small creatures that didn't need to understand epidemiology or government response protocols. They just needed to know when to hide. There's another bag, Sarah said quietly. Back at my mom's house. She packed it for you. She's never met you, and she packed a bag for you. Because she asked me if you'd be willing to believe this, and I told her you wouldn't be. And she asked if I'd leave without you, and I couldn't answer her. We drove back to Margaret's house in silence. The driveway was still dark, but now I could see light behind the curtains in the back room. Sarah's mother was awake, waiting, probably listening for the sound of the car. The inside of the house smelled like old wood and something else, something like time and grief. Sarah's father had been dead for 6 years, and the house still hadn't quite gotten used to his absence. Margaret was in the kitchen when we came in. She was a smaller version of Sarah, with the same sharp eyes but softer features. She was wearing clothes that looked chosen with the same practical intention that Sarah's had. Functional, durable. She was holding a mug of coffee that had probably gone cold an hour ago. "This is David," Sarah said unnecessarily. "I know who he is," Margaret said. She wasn't unkind about it, just factual. I've been married to his wife for 11 years through stories. "Margaret," I said, because I was supposed to say something. She studied me for a long moment. I felt like I was being assessed, like she was trying to determine whether I was the kind of person who would listen or the kind of person who would waste her time. "Have you seen the news?" she asked finally. "Some of it," I said carefully. "Not the news," she said. "The actual news, not the official story. The videos that are coming from inside the hospitals, the ones that people on Reddit and Twitter are posting because they don't trust the official channels." "I haven't," I admitted. "Then you're not going to believe what I'm about to tell you," Margaret said matter-of-factly. "So let me just cut to the chase. I believe that an outbreak has begun in Portland, that it's far worse than the government is admitting, and that the government is not admitting it because they're panicking and confused and trying not to cause mass hysteria. I also believe that this infection is going to spread, that within weeks, possibly days, it will be in every major city. And I believe that at some point, there will be a moment where people realize the scope of what's happening. And that moment is going to cause chaos." "Okay," I said, still being careful. "I'm not asking you to believe me," Margaret continued. "I'm asking you to prepare as though I might be right. And if I'm wrong, then you're not going to lose anything by having some extra supplies. And if I'm right, then you're going to be grateful that you listened to an old woman you don't know very well talk about the worst-case scenario." "What kind of preparation are we talking about?" Margaret moved toward the living room, and we followed. She'd converted part of it into a staging area. There were supplies laid out on the dining table, canned goods, water, first aid kits, face masks, medications, flashlights, batteries, maps, cash. It looked like the apocalypse had been carefully curated and arranged for examination. "I've been preparing for something like this for 5 years, Margaret said. Not because I was sure it was coming, but because I thought the risk was high enough to justify the expense. I had a military background. I've seen what happens when systems fail." She paused. "I watched my husband die in a hospital that couldn't help him. I promised myself I wouldn't put myself in a position to depend on those systems again." "What kind of infection do you think this is?" I asked. My friend thinks it's some kind of altered coronavirus, Margaret said. Very aggressive respiratory presentation, very contagious. She said the hospital is seeing people go from initial symptoms to severe respiratory distress in less than 48 hours, and that it's highly contagious, airborne, maybe also contact. I felt something crystallize in my chest, a particular kind of fear that only emerges when you realize someone you care about is genuinely frightened. "What do you want us to do?" I asked. Margaret looked at me, and for the first time, I saw approval move across her face. "Right now, nothing," she said. "Right now, I want you to go home and observe what happens over the next 72 hours. Pay attention to the news, but more importantly, pay attention to how people react to the news. Pay attention to whether more people get infected. Pay attention to whether the government story changes. And if those things happen, I want you to call me, and I want you to come back here, and I want you to be willing to leave." "Leave to where?" I asked. "I have a property up north," Margaret said. "Nothing fancy, cabin, acreage. It's remote. It's defensible. It's far away from population centers. If this becomes what I think it might become, that's where we go." Sarah reached over and took my hand. "He's coming with me," she said to Margaret. "Whatever happens, we stay together." Margaret nodded like this was the answer she'd been hoping for. "Then he should take the other bag," she said. "The one I packed for him. It's in the back room." We left the house at 11:30 p.m. Sarah drove while I sat in the passenger seat holding a bag that a stranger had packed for me based on assumptions about what I might need to survive the end of the world. The radio was on low. We caught the latest update. 37 confirmed cases in Portland now. 5 hospitalizations, 2 deaths. The deaths were being described as complications from pre-existing conditions, which is what you say when you don't want people to panic, but you also can't hide the fact that some people are dying. "Do you believe her?" I asked Sarah. "I don't know," Sarah said. "I think my mom is intelligent and thoughtful. I think she's scared. I think she might be right. And I think the downside of her being right and us not preparing is worse than the downside of her being wrong and us having wasted some money on supplies." "That's a reasonable way to think about it," I said. "Is it?" Sarah asked. "Or is it paranoia that sounds reasonable when you say it out loud?" I didn't have an answer for that. We drove the 93 minutes home in the dark. The roads were still mostly empty. When we got to the house, Sarah pulled into the driveway and shut off the engine. "Whatever happens," she said, "I need you to know that I'm sorry I lied to you. I should have told you this morning. I should have trusted you." "It's okay," I said. "It's not," she said. "But thank you for saying it anyway." We carried the bags inside. I opened mine later, after Sarah was asleep. It contained almost everything Margaret had assumed I might need. Water purification tablets, protein bars, basic medications, a change of clothes, a flashlight, batteries, latex gloves, a cheap N95 mask, cash, a map of the state with the northern cabin marked with a red X. At the bottom, there was a note, handwritten on lined paper. It said, "If Sarah loves you enough to worry about whether you'll survive this, you're lucky. Don't waste that luck." I put everything back in the bag and shoved it into the back of my closet. Then I went to bed, and I lay there in the dark, listening to Sarah breathe beside me. And I thought about how we were living through the moment just before the world changed, how we were inside the last normal night, and we didn't quite know it yet. By Tuesday, there were 214 confirmed cases. The word outbreak was being used now, but only in a very careful way. and only by certain outlets. The official health department statement was still cautious, still suggesting this was a contained situation with a clear trajectory. They were lying, of course, but I didn't know that yet. I wanted to believe them. It's easier to believe official authority than to believe that the person you love might be right about something this terrible. I went to work. People were starting to talk about it. Not panic yet. Just this low-level anxiety that hadn't quite crystallized into action. Some people had started wearing masks. A few had called in sick. The Henderson Project continued on, which seemed surreal and important and completely irrelevant all at once. By Wednesday, the official count was 438, still mostly in Portland. But now there were confirmed cases in Eugene, in Salem, in Seattle. The health department was starting to change their language. They were using phrases like community spread and accelerating transmission. They were still saying they had it under control, but the edges of their confidence were fraying. Sarah barely left the house. She spent most of her time on the internet, reading forums and social media posts from people claiming to be healthcare workers, from people who had family in hospitals, from people who were terrified, and probably right to be terrified. She was becoming an expert in something I didn't want to be an expert in. "We should make a list," she said on Thursday morning. "A list of what?" I asked, though I knew. "Things we need," she said. "My mom sent me an inventory. She said if we're going to actually be prepared, we can't just have one bag. We need to think about what we'd need if we had to shelter in place, or if we had to leave quickly, or if we had to be gone for weeks." "Sarah, I know," she said. "I know you think this is overreacting. But I need you to do this with me. I need you to help me think about this, because if my mom is right, it's going to matter. And if she's wrong, then we spend a weekend making a list. We can afford to make a list." So we made a list. It was a strange thing to do. It was practical and absurd and terrifying all at once. We listed food, water, medications, first aid supplies, gas canisters, batteries, flashlights, cash, documents, a battery-powered radio, bleach, gloves, masks. We listed clothes in different seasons. We listed things for entertainment in case we got stuck somewhere without power. We listed medications for anxiety and sleep. "We should probably get a gun," Sarah said quietly. I looked at her. "My mom suggested it," she continued. "She said if this gets as bad as she thinks, having some way to protect ourselves might matter." "From what?" I asked, though I understood what she meant. "From people," Sarah said simply. "If things get desperate, people get dangerous." We didn't get a gun, but I added it to the list, and we didn't remove it. By Friday, there were 2,000 confirmed cases across the Pacific Northwest. The news was starting to feel like a different kind of emergency. The kind where the authorities stop trying to sound confident and just start trying to sound professional. The kind where you realize they don't actually have a plan they're confident in. The governor called for a regional emergency declaration. People started buying masks, and the stores started running out of them. I drove to 3 different pharmacies trying to find N95s. All of them were sold out. The third one had been picked clean. The shelves where the masks had been were just empty spaces, and that empty space felt like a preview of something. I called Margaret. "You were right," I said. "I'm not right," she said. "I'm just prepared. Being prepared is what you do when you acknowledge that bad things are possible. Come Saturday, bring Sarah. We'll make sure you have what you need." We drove up Saturday morning. The weather was clear. The roads were more crowded than they'd been all week. People were trying to get somewhere else, I realized. Away from the cities, away from the infection, away from the feeling of things falling apart. Margaret had expanded her preparation. She'd moved everything into the garage. There were crates of supplies now, everything organized and labeled and accounted for. There was also information laid out on a table. News printouts, maps, satellite images of the cabin, a detailed inventory of supplies already at the cabin. "I want you to go there," Margaret said. She was dressed differently than last time. Practical field clothing, boots, everything designed for movement and durability. "I want you to go there and spend a night, just to see if you can imagine being there for an extended period." "How extended?" I asked. "Anywhere from a few weeks to indefinitely," Margaret said. "I think the best case is that this will be controlled within 6 weeks. The worst case is that it becomes endemic and we never go back to normal. The most likely case is somewhere in between." "That's a very wide range," I said. "Yes," Margaret agreed, "because I have no idea what's actually going to happen. But I know that whatever it is, it'll go easier if you're prepared." We packed the car with supplies from Margaret's garage. Canned food, water, medical supplies, fuel canisters. Everything organized in a way that was practical and ominous. Then we drove to the cabin. It was a 2-hour drive north, into territory that got progressively less populated as we moved. The cabin was set back from the main road, down a private drive that was mostly overgrown. It was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that was older than I was, but it was solid. It was defensible. And it was isolated enough that you could imagine disease and chaos happening somewhere else entirely. We spent the night there. We made a fire in the fireplace. We ate canned soup. We sat in the dark outside and listened to the sound of the forest, which was vast and indifferent, and didn't care about pandemics or government responses or how afraid we'd become. "Could we live here?" Sarah asked. I looked around at the small cabin, at the supplies stacked in the corner, at the map on the wall marking the nearest town as 17 miles away. "If we had to," I said. "Yes." When we drove back down the mountain on Sunday, my phone started buzzing with notifications. The infection count had jumped to 5,000 confirmed cases. But more than that, people were starting to get sick that weren't in Portland. Cases were appearing in California, in Idaho, in Nevada. The outbreak was becoming a pandemic, and everyone was starting to understand it at the same time. By Monday, people had stopped going to work. The office sent out a memo saying they were shifting to remote work, that everyone should work from home until further notice. The tone was trying to be casual about it, but the subtext was clear. We don't know if our building is safe anymore. Sarah's job had already shut down completely. They'd closed the office Monday morning with no timeline for reopening. She was trying to sound calm about the termination, but I could see the fear underneath. We'd suddenly lost 1/3 of our household income, and we didn't know for how long. The news was fragmenting. The official government sources were still trying to maintain a sense of control. But independent reporters were starting to share footage from hospitals that contradicted the official narrative. People in hazmat suits, ICUs completely full. Patients being turned away. Morgues that couldn't handle the volume. It wasn't the zombie apocalypse yet. It wasn't anything like that. It was just a virus moving through the population faster than anyone had expected. And the systems designed to handle this kind of thing were failing because they'd been designed by people who thought they knew what they were preparing for. On Wednesday, the first roadblock went up. I heard about it on the radio. A checkpoint about 40 minutes north of the city. Police stopping cars, checking where people were coming from, where they were going. The official story was that they were screening for people who'd been exposed to the virus. The unofficial story, the one people started talking about immediately, was that they were trying to prevent people from escaping the city. That night, I asked Sarah if we should go to the cabin. "Not yet," she said. "My mom thinks we should wait until the system actually breaks, until sheltering in place becomes impossible. Right now, we're safer in our house than we would be on the roads." "How do we know when that moment is?" I asked. "We'll know," Sarah said. "We'll feel it." The feeling came on Friday. It started with the utility company sending a notice that they were implementing rolling blackouts, just to reduce strain on the system during peak hours. Not a big deal. Except it was a big deal, because it meant the infrastructure was straining. It meant the world was getting a little bit darker, a little bit more fragile. Then it was the grocery stores. They started imposing limits. No more than 5 items per person. Certain items, face masks, sanitizer, certain medications, were restricted to 1 per customer. The shelves that had been picked clean started looking worse. There were sections that had nothing in them at all. I went to the store on Friday evening. I wasn't trying to panic buy, I just wanted to get some basics. But standing in the checkout line, watching people load baskets with canned goods and bottled water, I understood that something had shifted. People had moved from cautious concern to active fear. The social contract that said stores would always have food had broken. Everyone understood it at once. On Saturday morning, Sarah's mother called. "It's time," she said. "The hospitals in Portland are at capacity. They're talking about starting to refuse admission to people over a certain age. The infection rate is accelerating. I think you have maybe 48 hours before they close the roads completely. I want you to come now." I looked at Sarah. She was already packing. "We're leaving," she said. "We're leaving now." We'd prepared for this. We'd made lists. We'd packed bags. We'd thought about what we'd need. But the actual act of leaving was different from the imagined act of leaving. Leaving meant accepting that things had gotten bad enough that staying was worse than going. Leaving meant agreeing with Margaret's assessment that the world was ending in a way that was manageable if you had a cabin in the mountains and a plan. I loaded the car while Sarah did a final walkthrough of the house. She was checking that the stove was off, that the doors were locked, that we weren't leaving anything critical behind. It was the walkthrough of someone who didn't think they were coming back. "Is it really this bad?" I asked her when she got in the car. "I think," Sarah said carefully, "that it's going to get worse. And I think my mom was right to prepare for it. And I think being in the city right now is the worst place we could be." We left at 10:15 a.m. on Saturday morning. We'd been living for a week in the slow acceleration of crisis, and now we were leaving. We made it 40 miles north before we saw the first roadblock. They'd set it up at a highway junction. 2 cars, police lights flashing, officers in white masks and gloves directing traffic. They were stopping every vehicle, checking IDs, asking questions, asking where people were coming from and where they were going. The line was long, maybe 30 cars ahead of us. People in their cars, staring ahead, trying to figure out what was happening. "What do we tell them?" Sarah asked. "The truth," I said. "We tell them we're going north to a property we own." We didn't own it. Margaret owned it. But it seemed like the kind of detail that might not matter to people who were just trying to maintain order. We inched forward in the line. It took 40 minutes to move through. When we finally got to the checkpoint, the officer who approached was wearing a full mask and gloves. He had a clipboard and a thermometer. "ID," he said. We handed them over. He checked them, then looked up at us. "Where are you heading?" "We have a cabin property north of here," I said. "We're just going to shelter there for a while." The officer studied me. I couldn't read his expression because it was mostly covered, but I could see his eyes, and they looked tired. "A lot of people are trying to leave the city," he said. "Orders are to let some people through, stop others. The rule is, if you have a legitimate reason to go north, you can go. If you're just fleeing the city, we have to send you back." "We're not fleeing," I lied. "We plan to come up here anyway. We're just accelerating the trip." He looked at Sarah. She looked back at him with an expression that was almost serene. She'd made peace with something that I was still negotiating with. That things were bad, and they were going to get worse, and there wasn't any point in pretending otherwise. "Okay," he said. He handed back our IDs. "You can go through, but stay off the main roads. We're implementing checkpoints on 97 and 395. Surface streets are clear for now." We thanked him and drove on. Behind us, I could see him turning away a car. The people inside looked frantic. The officer was explaining something, pointing them back the way they'd come. The cabin is reached by a series of surface roads that wind through small towns and agricultural land. We followed them, watching the landscape gradually shift from urban fringe to rural emptiness. The towns we passed through looked strange. Some businesses were closed. Some had handwritten signs saying, "Closed until further notice." Some people were boarding up windows. It was a Friday afternoon, and the apocalypse was happening in daylight. We stopped in a small town called Mercer to get gas and pick up some supplies we'd forgotten. Additional food, more water, batteries. The gas station was functioning, but the convenience store section was picked clean. The shelves were mostly empty. The woman behind the counter looked at us with a kind of exhausted resignation that suggested she'd seen hundreds of people come through looking for things that weren't there. "We've been out of most things since this morning," she said when I asked about bottled water. "Most stores in town are closing. People are leaving. I'm probably going to close by end of day." "Where are you going?" Sarah asked. "Have a daughter in Portland," the woman said. "Trying to get to her. Or she's trying to get to us. We're both scared. Both trying to figure out where's safer." There wasn't a good answer for that, so we just bought the gas and left. Margaret was waiting for us at the cabin. She'd been there since early morning, making final preparations. She'd brought supplies from her house. She'd stocked the cabin's pantry. She'd filled every water container we had. She'd charged every battery. "You made good time," she said when we pulled up. "The roads are probably going to be worse by tomorrow." "We saw a checkpoint," I said. "They're trying to slow the exodus," Margaret said. "It won't work, but they're trying. Eventually they'll give up and just let people go, because there will be too many people trying to leave and the system will break." We spent the rest of the afternoon unloading the car and organizing the cabin. We moved supplies into a back room. We set up water storage. We made sure the fireplace was functional and we had enough fuel. We prepared the cabin for occupation for an indefinite period. As it got dark, Margaret made dinner. Real dinner, not from supplies, using things she'd brought from town. We ate together in the small kitchen, and nobody talked about what was happening. We just ate and drank wine and pretended for a moment that this was a normal weekend in a cabin, and not the end of civilization as we'd understood it. After dinner, Margaret turned on the battery-powered radio. The news was bad. Confirmed infections in the tens of thousands now, spread across 15 states. The Surgeon General had issued a recommendation that people not gather in groups larger than 10. Schools were closing. Bars and restaurants were being ordered shut. The official terminology had shifted from outbreak to pandemic. And then the news started reporting something else. In New York City, there were bodies in the streets. The hospitals had simply stopped functioning. Patients were being turned away. People were dying at home and not being picked up. The social infrastructure that had held everything together was collapsing under the weight of scale. That's what Margaret meant, Sarah said quietly. About what? I asked. About why we needed to come here, she said. It's not just the virus. It's what happens when enough people get sick at once. It's the system breaking. It's chaos. The first sign that we'd made the right decision came on day 4. We had a working vehicle with a full tank of gas. We had supplies to survive for at least a month, maybe longer with rationing. We had water. We had shelter. We had Margaret, who'd been preparing for this kind of thing for half a decade. Most people in the cities were not in that position. The news reports started coming through around midday. Portland was implementing a shelter-in-place order. Nobody was supposed to leave their houses except for essential purposes. The roads were being more heavily patrolled. Anyone caught trying to leave the city was being turned back. We had a television that ran on the generator, and we watched the news coverage. Crowds at grocery stores that had run out of food. Long lines at hospitals where people were being refused treatment because there was no room. The military had been called in to help with the logistics. FEMA was setting up temporary hospital facilities. It wasn't the zombie apocalypse. It was worse in some ways. It was competent, civilized people trying to manage a crisis that was too large for the systems they'd built. And it was failing. We should turn off the news, Margaret said on day 5. It's not going to help us, and it's going to make us scared. We're already scared, Sarah said. Yes, Margaret agreed. But right now, our survival doesn't depend on knowing the latest death count. It depends on staying calm and focused. Let me know when something relevant happens. Otherwise, we're better off not knowing. So we turned off the news. The next several days blurred together into a kind of strange routine. We'd wake up, make breakfast, do chores around the cabin. We'd chop wood for the fireplace. We'd organize supplies. We'd maintain the generator. We'd listen to the battery radio for essential information. We'd eat, usually in silence, and try not to think about the fact that we'd been right about this, and that most people hadn't been, and that most people were probably scared in ways that we'd managed to preempt. On day 8, we heard sounds from the road. It was late at night, maybe 11 o'clock. We were asleep or trying to be, and then there were sounds. A car engine, shouting, the sound of tires squealing. Margaret got up first. She wasn't panicked, just alert. She looked out the window and then closed the blinds. Someone's crashed, she said, on the main road. Should we do something? Sarah asked. No, Margaret said. We stay here. We stay quiet. We let them handle it. But it didn't stay contained to the road. About an hour later, we heard someone trying the gate to the property. The gate that Margaret had installed when we first arrived. A simple metal gate with a lock. Sarah grabbed my hand. Margaret went to the window again. She was holding the gun, the one she'd never explicitly told us she'd brought, but that we'd somehow always known was there. Someone's trying to get in, Margaret said. Her voice was completely steady. They're looking for shelter, probably, or supplies. What do we do? I asked. We don't do anything, Margaret said. The gate will hold. They'll try for a few minutes, then they'll move on. People in panic mode aren't methodical. They're looking for easy options. The person outside tried the gate for about 5 minutes, shaking it, testing it, hoping it would give. Then they stopped. We heard another car door. Voices. A car driving away. We didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, we found someone had left something on the other side of the gate. a note written on a piece of cardboard in large letters. "Please help. Family is sick, needs supplies." Margaret read it and then carefully folded it and put it in the fire. "That's one of the hardest decisions about staying prepared," she said. "You're prepared because you know that you can't save everyone. You can only save yourself. And sometimes people will try to make you feel guilty about that." "Would you have helped them?" I asked. "No," Margaret said, "because I don't know if they're actually sick, or if they're desperate enough to lie about it. Because I don't know if they're dangerous. Because I have 2 people I'm responsible for. And my responsibility to them is greater than my responsibility to strangers. That's survival. That's the choice." By day 12, the world had fundamentally changed. The shelter-in-place order in Portland had become a lockdown. The military was enforcing it. There were reports of people being arrested for trying to leave their homes. The infection rate had accelerated past 1 million cases nationwide. The death toll was in the tens of thousands and rising every day. But we didn't know most of that because we'd stopped checking. We'd developed a routine that insulated us from the constant stream of catastrophe. We'd wake up, eat breakfast, do chores, eat lunch, do more chores, eat dinner, and go to bed. We were living a very small, very manageable version of existence. Sarah and I spent most of our time together. We'd talk about things that had nothing to do with the outside world. We'd remember our early dating. We'd imagine futures that might happen when all of this was over. We were coping through imagination and nostalgia. Margaret was different. She was operational. She was always thinking about what might happen next, what we might need to prepare for. She was in a constant state of readiness that I recognized as her way of processing fear, turning fear into action, turning uncertainty into control. On day 14, Margaret told us that we needed to start planning for the real possibility that we might be here for more than a month. "The infection is accelerating," she said, checking a handwritten log she'd been maintaining. "If it follows the trajectory I'm modeling, we're looking at a significant portion of the population being infected over the next 3 to 4 months. That means the healthcare system will be functionally non-existent for that entire period. That means that supply chains will break. That means that eventually, people are going to be desperate enough to do things they wouldn't normally do." "Like what?" Sarah asked. "Like form groups to look for supplies," Margaret said. "Like become aggressive about it. Like potentially become dangerous. The cabin is good, but it's not a fortress. If enough people get desperate enough, they're going to start trying to take things from people who have them." "Should we go deeper into the woods?" I asked. "Not yet," Margaret said. "We have enough supplies to feel reasonably secure here. But we should prepare for the possibility that we might need to move, or that we might need to defend what we have. I'm going to set up some basic security measures. Tripwires, early warning systems. Nothing lethal, but things that give us time to respond if people come around." "You're talking about defending against people," I said. "I'm talking about accepting that desperation makes people do things," Margaret said quietly. "I'm preparing for the possibility, not expecting it. But if I don't prepare for it, and it happens, then I'm the person who was warned and didn't listen." Sarah and I didn't argue. We'd already made the choice to trust Margaret's judgment. We'd already accepted that she'd been right about things we'd initially dismissed. It seemed foolish to start questioning her now. Over the next few days, Margaret set up subtle security measures around the cabin. Motion sensors that would trigger small bells. Branches placed in specific patterns that would be obvious if disturbed. A clear sight line from the cabin windows to the gate. Nothing aggressive, but everything designed to give us warning if anyone approached. "I don't expect to need these," Margaret said as she was finishing. "But they buy us time, and in a crisis, time is what matters." On day 18, someone used the bell. Not accidentally, deliberately. It rang once, loud and clear, in the early evening. Margaret was at the window immediately, looking out toward the gate. Sarah and I joined her. There was a man standing outside the gate. He looked about 60, thin, moving like someone who was tired and desperate and aware that he was neither welcome nor safe. He was alone. "What does he want?" Sarah asked. "We're about to find out," Margaret said. She moved to the door and opened it, but stayed on the porch. She didn't invite him in or move toward him. "I know you probably can't help me," the man called out. "But I have to ask. Do you have any food? My wife is sick. We're out of food. We've been trying to find anywhere that has supplies." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. "Where are you coming from?" she asked. "Town," the man said. "We live in town. We were sheltering, but we're running out of food. And the stores are all picked clean. I know people keep things like this. I know someone has to have supplies. I'm just looking for help." "I can't help you," Margaret said. Her voice was kind but firm. "I don't have supplies to share." "Please," the man said. "Just a little. Some canned goods. Anything. My wife is sick. She needs to eat to take medication." "I'm sorry," Margaret said. And I think she actually was sorry. But she closed the door. The man stood at the gate for a few minutes, and then he walked away. We watched him until he disappeared into the darkening trees. "That was one of the hardest decisions in a crisis," Margaret said quietly. "Every person who comes to the gate is going to be someone in genuine need. Every person is going to have a story that makes sense. And I still can't help them. Because if I help one person, then people know we have supplies. And then more people come. And then it becomes a situation we can't control." "What if he tells people about us?" Sarah asked. "Then he tells them," Margaret said. "And we deal with that if it happens. But right now, our best survival strategy is remaining invisible. That means not taking people in. That means not sharing supplies. That means making hard choices." Sarah looked at me, and I saw something in her face that looked like understanding. Like she'd crossed some threshold in her own mind and accepted that this was the world now. Not the world she wanted, but the world that was real. By day 25, we'd stopped counting days. The outside world had become abstract. We didn't know what was happening in the cities anymore. The radio had mostly static now, and the broadcasts that did come through were confused and conflicting. Some were official government messages. Some seemed to be from people broadcasting on shortwave, trying to communicate with whoever was listening. We'd settled into a state of almost meditative acceptance. We had shelter, we had food, we had water, we were alive. Everyone outside the cabin was dealing with things that seemed unimaginable from our perspective. We weren't grateful, exactly. But we'd stopped fighting against the fact of our luck. Then the man came back. This time, there were 5 of them. And this time, they came in the middle of the night. We woke to the sound of the motion sensor bell ringing repeatedly. Margaret was up first, moving quietly to the window. And when I saw her expression, I knew something was different. This wasn't one desperate man asking for food. This was something else. "Get in the back room," Margaret said quietly. "Both of you. Now." We did what she said. Sarah grabbed my hand and we moved to the back room of the cabin. Margaret was still holding the gun. She'd moved it from where she usually kept it and was holding it like someone who knew how to use it. "Lock the door," she said. Let me handle this. Margaret, I started to say. Lock the door, she repeated. And don't open it unless I come get you. We locked the door. Sarah and I stood in the dark room, listening. We could hear voices outside, multiple people. We could hear them trying the gate, then trying to go around it. We could hear them moving around the property. They're looking for a way in, Sarah whispered. I couldn't respond. I was listening to the sounds of people testing our boundaries. And I was understanding for the first time that Margaret had been preparing for something real. That the theoretical had become actual. Then Margaret opened the back door of the cabin. We heard her moving outside. We heard her voice, calm and level, calling out, "There's nothing here for you. Go back the way you came." A man's voice responded, "We're not leaving without supplies." "Then you're not leaving," Margaret said. And I heard something in her voice that was different from anything I'd heard before. It was the voice of someone who had made a decision and was now executing it. "I have a gun. You have nothing. You're outnumbered in capability even if you outnumber me in numbers. I'm giving you the choice to leave. Once I stop giving you that choice, I'll do something else." For a long moment there was silence. Then the man's voice again, but different now, uncertain. "We're just trying to survive." "So am I," Margaret said. "And I'm going to do it by staying here. You need to do it somewhere else." We heard movement. The sound of people stepping back, the sound of footsteps moving away from the cabin, the sound of a vehicle starting, down the road, a ways. And then silence. Margaret came back inside and locked the door. She came to the back room and let us out. "They're gone," she said. "They were looking for supplies, but they're not organized enough to commit to taking them. They're desperate, but not desperate enough. That will change. At some point, desperation will overcome hesitation. But not today." Sarah was shaking. I was shaking. Margaret sat down like her legs had suddenly given out. "That's what I was preparing for," she said quietly. "Not the virus. That's something we can manage by staying isolated. I was preparing for the moment when other people's desperation becomes more dangerous than anything the virus could do to us." We didn't sleep that night. We kept the lights off and watched the property, waiting to see if the group would come back. They didn't. But their presence hung over us, the knowledge that people would come, the knowledge that we had something they didn't, and they were willing to take risks to get it. "We should leave," I said around 4 a.m. "Go where?" Margaret asked. "Deeper," I said. "Further away. Somewhere more remote." "We could do that," Margaret said. "But we'd be traveling in the dark, on unfamiliar roads, with people looking for supplies. We'd be more vulnerable on the road than we are here. Better to stay. Better to be prepared if they come back." But they didn't come back. The next day, we saw the consequences of our decision not to help. A vehicle passed on the main road, moving slowly. It had the look of a police cruiser, but it was moving strangely, erratically. It crashed about a quarter-mile down the road. We watched from a distance as the vehicle didn't move again. We never saw what happened to the people inside. We just knew that the road had claimed them, or something on the road had claimed them. By day 35, the symptoms appeared. Sarah was the first. She developed a cough in the morning, just a slight one. She didn't seem to think it was anything. But Margaret noticed, and I could see the moment that Margaret's carefully maintained composure cracked. "When did it start?" Margaret asked, moving into doctor mode. Not that she was a doctor, but she'd trained in first aid and emergency response. "This morning," Sarah said. "It's probably nothing. Probably just dusty from the cabin." But we all knew what it was. We moved Sarah to the second bedroom. Not to isolate her. The virus was airborne, so isolation didn't make much sense. But out of some superstitious need to take precautions, Margaret started checking Sarah's temperature every 2 hours. No fever yet, just the cough. By evening, I'd started feeling it too. A slight scratch in the throat, a sense of wrongness that wasn't quite pain. "We were exposed," Margaret said. She was looking at something on the wall, not at us. That night when they came, someone in that group was infected. We were exposed. "You were exposed too," I pointed out. "I know," Margaret said. "We all were." The next morning, Margaret had a fever. It was 101.3 degrees. She tried to hide it, but I saw her checking the thermometer and saw the way her jaw tightened when she read the number. "How long until—" I didn't finish the sentence. "I don't know," Margaret said. "They say severe respiratory cases can develop within 24 to 48 hours. Milder cases can take longer. Could be weeks before we know what we're dealing with." "What happens if it gets severe?" Sarah asked. "We manage it," Margaret said. "We keep you breathing, we keep you hydrated. We manage fever. We hope your immune system is stronger than the virus." The next 5 days were the longest of my life. Sarah's cough got worse. She developed a fever of 102 degrees. She was weak, but not critically ill. Margaret was handling it better, physically, but psychologically, she was deteriorating. She'd been so prepared for everything except the thing that mattered most: actually facing the virus. I was the least affected. My fever never got above 100.5. My cough was persistent, but not severe. I was the canary in the coal mine, the person whose mild infection was supposed to reassure us that we'd survive this. It didn't reassure me. On day 42, Sarah stopped coughing. Her fever broke. She woke up one morning and said she felt better. She didn't sound better, but she looked better. Margaret didn't seem convinced, but she acknowledged the improvement. Margaret's fever had peaked at 104 degrees. She'd spent 2 days where she was barely conscious, and I'd sat beside her wondering if this was how it ended. Not by infection spreading through the population, but by the virus reaching the one person who'd prepared for everything else and catching her by surprise anyway. But her fever broke too. And then it was just me, watching them recover, waiting for my own symptoms to either worsen or disappear. They disappeared. By day 45, all 3 of us were recovering. The coughs lingered, the weakness lingered. But we were going to survive. It was the first time we truly understood what Margaret had been preparing for. Not the abstract idea of a pandemic. The actual reality of being sick, being isolated, being dependent on the supplies you'd gathered, and the will to survive that was the only thing that mattered. "We're lucky," Margaret said on the day we all got out of bed at the same time. "Most people don't have access to the resources we had. Most people are in much worse shape." "Or we did everything right," Sarah said. "That too," Margaret acknowledged. The recovery period lasted about 2 weeks. We regained our strength slowly. We returned to our routines. We started paying attention to the outside world again. The radio brought in reports that were sometimes clear and sometimes not. The pandemic had reached every state. The death toll was in the hundreds of thousands. The healthcare system had essentially collapsed in urban areas. People were dying at home because there was no hospital space for them. Bodies were being stacked in temporary facilities. The government had declared martial law in several regions. But it was all distant now. It was information about something that was happening to other people in other places. We'd been tested by the thing itself, and we'd survived it. And that survival had changed us in ways that I couldn't quite articulate. The worst part, Sarah said one evening, is that we might be the lucky ones. We prepared, we had supplies, we had knowledge about what to do. Most people didn't. Most people got sick and probably didn't make it. We did what we could, Margaret said. That's all anyone can do. Is it enough? Sarah asked. Margaret didn't answer for a long time. I don't know, she finally said. I prepared for something I thought would be survivable if you were ready. But I didn't prepare for the psychological weight of surviving while other people died. That's not something you can prep for with supplies. By day 60, we'd built a new kind of normal. We still maintained the security measures. We still didn't open the gate to anyone who came. But the frequency of people trying had decreased. Either they'd found other sources, or they'd given up, or they'd died. We didn't know which. We'd started a garden. Margaret had seeds stored, and we'd cleared an area and started planting things. It felt absurd and hopeful at the same time, like we were accepting that we might be here for longer than we'd initially thought, like we were thinking about next season. I'd started keeping a journal, not for anyone else, just for me, to record what had happened, to understand my own decisions and Sarah's decisions and Margaret's decisions, to try to make sense of how we'd gone from an ordinary morning to living in a cabin waiting out the end of the world. By day 90, the radio had mostly stopped working. The broadcasts had become less frequent, and when they did come through, they were usually just repeated messages about what to do if you suspected you had the infection. Stay home. Don't go to hospitals. The official channels seemed to have accepted that the situation was beyond their management. But Sarah had managed to pick up some shortwave broadcasts. People with radios broadcasting from wherever they were, trying to understand what was happening. Some of them were providing useful information. Others were just talking to hear voices. There was something deeply human about it. The need to communicate even when communication might not matter. One broadcast, though, was different. It was from a woman who sounded like she was a public health official. She was saying that the pandemic appeared to be slowing, that the infection rate had peaked and was now declining, that a vaccine was being developed and would be available within a few months, that there was a timeline for returning to some kind of normal. Margaret listened to the entire broadcast, and when it was over, she turned the radio off. Do you believe that? I asked. No, she said. I don't think we're through the worst of it. I think we're in the beginning of a very long decline. And I think normal, as we knew it, is gone. But I think she might be right that the acute phase is ending, that the immediate crisis is moving toward the manageable. What does that mean for us? Sarah asked. It means, Margaret said, that at some point we can leave here, that we can rejoin the outside world, that we won't be living in isolation forever. Do you want to? I asked. Margaret thought about this carefully. No, she said finally, but I think we might need to. I think there will be rebuilding to do, and I think we might have obligations to that, but not yet. For now, we stay here. We rest. We let the world sort itself out. Sarah reached over and took my hand. I'm glad you drove up here that day, she said to me. I'm glad I was right about this being necessary. And I'm glad you listened to me. I'm glad I married someone who listens to her mother, I said. I'm glad my mother's a prepper, Sarah said. I'm glad you all found me, Margaret said. And I'm glad we made it. We sat together in the cabin as the evening moved toward night, and we didn't talk about the outside world or what had happened to it. We just sat in silence, understanding something that we'd never quite articulated, that survival is often about small choices made long before the crisis arrives. That being prepared isn't paranoia. It's respect for the possibility that things can go wrong, and that the people you love matter more than being right about when things go wrong. 6 months later, I stood on the porch of the cabin and looked out at the mountains that had hidden us from the worst of it. The infection count had stabilized somewhere around 40 million confirmed cases, though everyone understood that the real number was significantly higher. The death toll had stabilized somewhere around 2 million. And again, everyone understood that was a profound undercount. Sarah was inside, making dinner. Margaret was in the garden, checking on the early spring growth. We'd stayed here longer than we'd initially thought we would. The outside world was still fragile. The systems that had broken were still in the process of being rebuilt. The vaccine had come, but slowly. Trust had been broken in ways that a vaccine couldn't fix. We decided to stay through the summer, maybe through the next winter. There was no rush to leave. The world would be there when we were ready to rejoin it. I thought about that first morning when Sarah had packed the bag she'd later tell me about. How she'd known something I hadn't. How she'd been scared and tried to prepare me for a future I didn't want to accept. How being right about something terrible isn't a victory. It's just the heavy knowledge that you were right, and everyone suffered who wasn't. We'd survived. Not everyone did. I thought about the woman at the gas station in Mercer trying to reach her daughter. I thought about the man at the gate asking for food for his sick wife. I thought about the people who'd crashed on the road and the millions of others who hadn't made it this far. Survival isn't something you earn. It's something you're given by circumstance and preparation and luck. And the weight of that gift is something I'd carry for the rest of my life. The knowledge that I was here, safe, while so many others weren't. Sarah called from inside that dinner was ready. I turned away from the mountains and went back into the cabin. Back to the people who'd saved me. Back to the life we'd built in the space between the world ending and whatever came next. That, I understood now, was all any of us could really do.